The following session was recorded live in San Antonio, Texas for the 2003 CALLERLAB Conference. This is tape number 29, Judgment Call.
Okay. Thank you for joining us. It's 3:30 and time to start the session. The session is called Judgment Call. I am the moderator. My name is Larry Davenport. I'm from Foster City, California, which is near San Francisco. And to establish a point I'll make in a minute, I've been calling for 18 years. I want you to remember that fact. We have two panelists. To my right is Tim Crawford from, let me see if I got it. It's Burlington, Ontario. For those of you who read your maps, that's near Hamilton. And if you can't find Hamilton, it's near Toronto. And Tim has been calling for a robust 31 years. To my far right is John Marshall from Sterling, Virginia. And on that map, it's near Washington, D.C. And 34 years, and so I wanted to establish that I'm the baby of the group. This is Judgment Call, as it's printed here, and so we'll make sure that people who buy the tape will also know what this session is about. Most of what's wrong with modern square dancing has been blamed at some time or other on poor caller judgment. It's easy to point the finger of blame, but how do we develop good judgment? This session will identify the kind of decisions we all face all the time, and will offer advice about how to make the right choices in those situations. Some opening remarks I wanted to make. You did know that that's what you were here for, correct? Did I read the wrong one? Before I turn this over, and they're still drawing straws as to who's going to go first, and we don't quite know yet, although I will say that Tim is closer to me. Anyway, I wanted to put some ideas on the table just to think about as sort of background, and we'll leave plenty of time for these two gentlemen to talk to, is I want to talk about what I think are some of the components of judgment. And I think, briefly, knowledge, experience, preparation, and leadership are the four components that I thought about when we talk about that. Knowledge, what is constituting the knowledge? It's the knowledge of the programs you are calling. Includes the definitions of the calls, formation and arrangement management, standard and non-standard setups, site calling, resolution, modules, other methods that you might have. Experience. With experience, we all learn through experience. Another way of saying is as we all learn by our mistakes. But knowledge without experience is only a small part of the component. And the experience through comfort with being able to move dancers through the formations and arrangements, seeing situations as they happen, making adjustments to your timing, to your choreography, and the list can go on endlessly. And if you tie together knowledge and experience and go out to call a dance that you have not prepared for, you still are not in a good position to apply good judgment to what you're doing. So you cannot get away from the fact that there is homework that is necessary to be ready to call the dance. And it may not be the right time to put on the table, but you probably have heard this so many times. There is the dance you planned, the dance you called, and the dance you should have called. And all of that obviously has a component of judgment to it. And finally, leadership and facilitation skills. And we think of ourselves as entertainers and leaders, but I'm not sure how many times we think of ourselves as facilitators. Facilitators are the dancers on the floor achieving what their objective is. And let's be clear about what their objective is. At least in my opinion, their objective is fun. If they're not out there for a good time, then why the heck are they there? And the other thing that comes with facilitation is your ability to influence the events that are happening with your group, and so that, again, for the purpose of helping them to achieve their goals, which is having fun. I borrow a lot from what I do in my other life. In my other life, I do a lot of project management, lead teams, and so I think about facilitation and influencing a lot of the time. And I don't think it's all that different to think about leading a square dance or calling a square dance to leading a team, because the team is you and the people who are participating with you, and I think we all need to think about that. But some of the things that you need to keep in mind as you think about facilitation and influencing and all those good things that go with leadership is the ability to lead a group. And we may see that in the square dance world as stage presence. We see it as showmanship and instilling confidence in the group. If the caller is nervous, the dancers are nervous. If the caller is confident, the caller who is confident that does something very wrong confidently, you can still maintain confidence for the dancers, but if you're nervous, you just never will. Your ability to relax the group. When I talk about facilitate the group, some of the notes I made here are things such as we all have egos. We know we have egos. We need to manage our egos. And to a very real extent, in order to be a facilitator and an influencer, you really need to check your ego at the door. And so it's something just to think about. We are there for their dancing pleasure. We can tell what's happening on the floor. If they're smiling and laughing and having a good time, that's a good feedback. If they're not, that's another kind of feedback. We must keep track of what's happening, be able to adjust what we're doing and what we're calling. And again, I said the bottom line there is, are we having happy dancers? And I think we're going to have a lot of discussion as we go forward here, and hopefully we'll have some happy people in the crowd here, because hopefully we're going to give you some things that will really help you. With that, did we finally draw the final straw and decide who's... We went with age.
We actually did. You get to finish. Go ahead.
You were looking at Tim right when you said that,
no,
were you
I was
not?
looking right at you.
Yeah. Seems to me that Mr. John Marshall has the microphone, so let me, with no further ado, turn it over to John.
Thank you. All right. It's interesting. Larry said that what we do affects, it's endless, he was talking about, the aspects of judgment. And it's absolutely true. Judgment impacts every aspect of calling. It doesn't matter whether it's teaching, entertaining, the choreographic aspect, music selection. We're going to talk about as much of this as we can. We're not going to fully turn this into a choreographic session, but choreography is a big part of what we do, but so is equally, in my view, music choice, that type of thing. It impacts all the different aspects of calling, but that in turn determines to a great extent the success of both the caller and the dancers. It's always a symbiotic relationship. It's the dancer and the caller and the dancer, and you cannot separate one from the other. So your judgment is constantly ongoing, and how the dancers judge you is constantly ongoing. And many times on their part, it's not conscious. It's not like they're sitting there saying, well, how did he say this, or how did he do that? Or it's just a natural, everyday thing that we all deal with. Look how he's dressed, or boy, he's really having an off night tonight. Why was he like that? You referenced the nervousness, Larry, and if you're confident and forward and make a mistake, and we all do, well, maybe Tim hasn't made any mistakes, but, no, that's right. The youngsters always make more, don't they? That's right. Okay, anyhow. The idea, though, is that you make a mistake, but if you remain with some level of confidence, you also retain some level of control, and I say control in a good way, in a positive way. We'll mention later on about the negative aspect of controlling behavior. That's another part of what we get caught up in. Our respective values greatly affect our exercise of judgment. Dancers have their set of values. Callers have their set of values. Hopefully, we can get them to mesh. The dancer's value, Larry already mentioned, fun or entertainment. Escapism is part of what they value, that opportunity to forget about what didn't get done at the house or the load of wash or what's sitting on the desk in the office, etc. Social interaction. More and more we're hearing people pay attention to what that's about. And I know we have attributed an incredible number of things, if not everything, including what color of the day it is, to 9/11. But it did reach a lot of people in a very special way, and they are, and still are, and were at that time, and still are evaluating the quality of their lives, how they want to spend that time, how they want to interact with other people. They are looking for social outlets and positive things, and I think that that's one of the things that we offer in this activity. There is both the mental and physical exercise aspect of what the dancer values. More and more, physically, you hear them talking about it, and mentally, as our population, our dancing population ages. It's not at all unusual to hear dancers say, one of the reasons I keep square dancing is because it keeps me sharp mentally. Well, that's fine. By the same token, we don't want to fry that circuit, with really, really nasty choreography, whatever, but we do want to keep them thinking and learning and experiencing, and that's good for them, and it's good for us. I understand they're getting older, and we probably necessarily are not because of what we all do, right? And it keeps us young, but we still need that stimulation. They didn't know I was kidding, did they, Mary? It's just nothing.
I think you've relaxed.
I see. Too much relaxation. A sense of accomplishment is also a factor for the dancer, a value that the dancers have. And it's not always a conscious one, but they walk out at the end of the night, or they have had that special tip of, man, we couldn't do anything wrong. They remember that tip forever. They can tell you who was in the square, Ask them a year from now. That sense of accomplishment is kind of special. It doesn't happen every single tip, but it's pretty special when it does. Well, on the flip side of this, we have the caller's values. Now, Larry's talking about checking the ego at the door. I personally think that's a pleasant thought, except that in reality it doesn't happen because it's part of us. We take it wherever we go. But managing it is another issue, right? Was it something I said, Dick?
Yeah.
Okay. The managing of the ego, that I kind of refer to that as ego building, because the better job we do, which includes that dancer response, and we know they're having a good time, etc., and they're coming back because they vote with their feet, all right, that's an ego building experience for the caller. You know, and it's fine to feel good about what you're doing. If you're like most of us, at the end of the dance, you step out of there and you do the post-mortem on the way home. You know, it's like, well, I wish I hadn't done that, I wish I hadn't done this. Or perhaps our partner is sharing with us those things that we might not have wanted to do, or don't ever do that again, you know, type thing. And we learn from that. But it is an ego-building experience. As long as we don't let the ego take over, I think we're in pretty good shape, and I think it's healthy. Personal and public success is one of the values that I think callers have. That's part of ego, but it's also part of what we do as we step forward and sense of self-worth, and looking for that kind of personal and public success. The personal aspect may be the improvement in your calling skills, whether it be you're trying to improve your command of choreographic management, or you're trying to improve your aspect of how you handle your voice and music. Those are all parts of things, so you can get that kind of personal success, and the public success obviously is reflected in the dancers that are coming out to you and the bookings you get. It is an outlet for the caller also. It's one of the things we value, is that ability to have self-expression or artistic expression in what we do. I understand that we have callers that's how it came out on the call sheet, that's how I'm going to do it, that's all there is, nothing artistic there. But that's not necessarily true. Even then, your interpretation of how you present that and how you share that with the dancer is still a way of expressing yourself and having that outlet, and that's important. Leadership performance. Some callers are born to be leaders. I mean, they are charismatic. It doesn't matter what they call. Everybody loves them, and they can lead the folks just about anywhere they want to go. There are other callers who are rather shy and reticent. If you speak to them when they're not behind the microphone, they'll just kind of shuffle around. They're quiet spoken. So put a microphone in their hand, they're a different person. But that's a good outlet for them, and it allows them to exercise some leadership performance, possibly that they're not allowed to exercise anywhere else in their lives. Maybe they can't be in a leadership performance position in their job. Maybe they're working the line. But that's okay. Here's another opportunity, which makes it of value for the caller. And there's the altruistic aspect of bringing pleasure to other people. A lot of folks feel really good about doing that. I know an awful lot of callers would call for free, partly because of what it does for us personally, but also for what we're doing for other people. And if you've been calling any length of time, you've had people come to you and say, I don't know what we would have done without square dancing. I don't know how we would have gotten through this difficult time in our lives without square dancing and what you bring to us. And some nights, as callers, we just don't feel that way, because you don't hear that very often. And it's like, what would it matter if I got hit by a truck tomorrow? They'd go hire somebody else. But it's not true. And we're touching people every time we pick up that microphone, and they take it away with them. There's a darker side to having leadership and command of a group of people. The word controlling comes to mind. It's hopefully not why people are calling, is to be able to order people around and tell other people what to do. I would hope not, anyway. Come on, machine, play. So I wanted to do that just basically as an overview. And there's two other questions that I want to mention in terms of judgment. One of them is just a reminder. I've noted to myself, cut your losses early. In terms of judgment, you're working with the floor dancers. Perhaps you've chosen to theme or workshop something, and tonight's just the wrong night. I mean, they could always do that darn split circulate before, but tonight's not the night. Don't be so determined that you're going to get them through it at all costs, because it is a cost. And we all get caught up in that, I think. I know they can do this, and we start pushing it and working it, and you get to that point where we find that the dancers are doing worse and worse and worse, and we won't let it alone, and we find ourselves having run it into the ground. Cut your losses early. Go into something else. Give them that opportunity. That's a judgment aspect that we need to be aware of, and we're not always keen in on that. I look at a couple of other things, too, in terms of judgment. Happy Harry, the famous international world caller, comes to town. He does the neatest things. He does 2 or 3 neat things, and you've made note of it because you're going to take it home, and your dancers know he's going to do this next week. I know I'm going to have to remember this because we're going to get to do it again. Ask yourself a couple of questions. Can I call this call? Can I do this, me personally? Can I present that as well as Happy Harry did when he came to town. I mean, maybe that's his thing. Every caller sitting up here will tell you there are things that I can present to the floor and be successful that they couldn't do with the same dancers, and vice versa. There are things that they can do. I'm not only talking about with your home groups. I'm talking about even if you have those guest opportunities. Certain things just really work well for you, and you can use those. But can you do what the traveling caller did when he came to town? Maybe you can, and that's great. But be fair with yourself. Be honest with yourself about that. And also you want to ask the question of, can this floor, this night, do this action, no matter how good I am? And we all know that our own groups are different from night to night in terms of how they function, how they react. What, I don't know, biorhythms, the moon, whatever it is. And we have to make those judgments there. Again, that goes back to what Larry was commenting on about programming the dance, the dance you programmed, the dance you called, and what you should have programmed. But we still have to be flexible. We still have to allow for that in our judgment. So be evaluating your floor. Maybe, especially if it's a new idea. Is this the night you want to do this? Maybe it isn't. Maybe for whatever reason. Maybe it's the wrong time. The other thing I have down here has to do with judgment about working with other callers. I'm going to touch on that briefly. I've got some choreographic stuff and some music stuff that we can come back to, Tim, after you've had some chance with the folks. Working with other callers, we'll all probably touch base on that. Some callers are in a position where they never have the opportunity to work with another caller. It just doesn't happen. They live too far out, wherever. They have the basement group or down at the Grange, what have you, and they just don't have that chance. But keep it in mind anyway for when the chance does occur. And others of us work with other callers pretty regularly. You get good working relationships, and that's great. But never, ever, ever embarrass another caller. You've seen the callers play the game, set them up, get them out, set them up, and get them out. The callers that are smart never offer something to their counterpart that they can't deal with. Any caller can go home and sit down with his checkers and create something that nobody else can get out of. Or if it's callers you have a sense of where they are in this, he'll never get out of that. Let me tell you who loses. You lose, the other caller is embarrassed, and the dancers always lose. But can it be done successfully? Oh, you bet. You can do it in such a way that it's great fun, but you need to know the caller you're working with. You need to have a sense of their competence. That's one way to not embarrass a caller. The caller teaches something ahead of you, and he teaches it incorrectly. At least you believe it, or maybe you know for a fact it's wrong. How do you deal with that? Because if you walk up and say, guys, I'm sorry, but that's just really not how it works, and Fred had it wrong. Let me show you how this call actually works. This works with music too. Let me show you how to really do that singing call. Oh, this is real good stuff. And even if it's not that blatant, but it's perceived that way by the dancers will alienate to you, not to the caller who made the mistake, because the dancers are human. We all make mistakes. How many mistakes a night do the dancers make? But intuitively, you get the blame because you put that caller in that position. Even though he may have been wrong in what he taught, their feeling is he didn't do anything wrong. You made him look bad. But there are ways to deal with. How would you deal with that situation? He taught it wrong. I might say, before I did anything with the dancers, I'd talk to the caller. Hey, Fred, I thought it went like this. What did you think? All right, resolve that. If it turns out that you're correct, you could go to the floor or let him do it either way and say, we had a difference of opinion on how that call works, and we're going to look at it a different way that we both agree works a little better. Right? Now, it's a we thing. The two of you have worked this out. The dancers aren't in the middle. The dancers get, hey, good, we're getting good stuff here. Everything's on track. It sounds like a simple, obvious thing, but it's so easy to fall into that because that's one of the places where our egos pop up. I know that call. I know that's wrong. I'll show them how to do it right. And it's so easy for that to happen. So we want to pay attention to those aspects as well. You see a lot of the callers that call either full-time or tremendously active callers that work with each other a great deal. And you see them do a lot of kidding and joking, and especially American humor where they're, throwing little shots, little zingers at one another. But the dancers know from the tonality. They know from the other caller's reaction. They know when people are kidding. John Jones, of course, has taken it to an art by his, the famous stare that he gives, where if people didn't know John, they might think he was really angry at something that's been said. Fortunately, enough people have experienced John and his approach to humor and people's approaches with him, and watching people just fade away under that withering stare that John offers, that they enjoy that part of it. But he's unique in that. I took my life in my hands last night at the banquet and tackled John. I actually said to Mary, my wife, I said, well, okay, it's time. I'm going to go after John. Let's see what happens, And, of course, I knew John would play, as he did. But that's fine. We know each other a long time. We've been in boardrooms together and so on. And so that's one of the differences. And the dancers sense that, But if they don't know you at all, and you throw a shot in fun at their club caller, and they don't know you, and the club caller's kind of taken unawares, didn't realize it was coming, you haven't done yourself any favors. So you want to get to some good rapport with the caller you're working with, because it'll also affect the tonality of what you have to say. I'm going to step out now. Let Tim talk a little bit more with you. We have a lot more things to share.
Oh, yeah? Thank you. First off, I just want you to know that I know that it's the last session of a couple days of a lot of stuff. So if you feel like you need to stand up and stretch or anything, just don't do that, and it'll interrupt me, and it bothers me. Okay? Now, I want you to know that my presentation pretty much boils down to, what they said, because it's a lot of this stuff is completely obvious to us all. So I just want to kind of reiterate some of the things that we went through and try to top them up a little bit with some examples. So if you feel like you want to throw your towel into the ring and talk about a little bit, feel free, and I'll ignore you till I'm done. Did you hear that?
One thing I didn't remind us all before, when we do get to the discussions, make sure we're going to make sure you get on the microphone so that we don't have the people on the tape hearing those long, blank silences.
I'd appreciate if you boys would play nice over there, will you?
Yeah. Yeah, so we don't want any long, blank silences. Okay. Now, this part of the program, John made all fabulous points. Some of them subtle, some of them obvious, and some of them probably that you do subconsciously. And I think judgment truly is, in fact, a double-edged sword. It's subconscious. You make unconscious decisions at every moment, and you make conscious decisions when you're forced to. And I think judgment, really is about those choices that we make. And I tend to, in my calling anyways, I tend to kind of split it out into two different categories. The stuff that I do that affect me personally, and the stuff that I do that are personality related, those types of judgments that I make, how I act, how I look, how I feel. And then I have another side of it, which is mechanical, the judgments that I make mechanically when I'm calling, choreography generally, music generally, that type of thing. So decision making for me is, we tend to, once we start calling, we tend to fall into kind of a bit of a rut. We kind of get comfortable into the comfort zone, and we are less forced to make judgment calls on the things that we deal with because we've pretty much already tested them, we've tried them, we've fallen into the little place where we're happy, and we get our little happy land going, and our calling ends up being kind of like the same all the time. So the judgment call becomes less of an issue unless you're the type of caller who has a strong will and your decisions, you get into your happy place, but your judgment is flawed, and so you constantly end up making the same bad decision over and over again, and it becomes an unconscious decision. Usually those callers don't work a whole lot, and they work generally at their own little happy place. The callers that you see on the road every day that are traveling also, believe it or not, even though we talk to multiple crowds, hundreds and hundreds of different people rather than the same people each week, we still fall into the same zone. And I like to refer to what I do these days, unfortunately, as a Tim Crawford show. And thank God people don't come to my dances more than once. So, no, I'm just kidding. I really try to mix it up. So, when you, but we do have a shtick that we do. We do the same things a lot. And that's because we've fallen into that happy place, and we don't have to make judgments about those things. But they become unconscious. Hopefully they are the right decisions. You can usually tell by how successful you are with the floor. If you make conscious decisions all the time, and John was talking about bailing out on types of things that you might do, but conscious decisions are always based, all these decisions are always based on things that you have already generally tried, or you should. Your approach to this should be that it should be well thought out in advance. You probably saw this great little piece of choreography or something. You said, I got to try that. So you need to have an approach to doing that. You need to have it thought out.
you should have tested it with your checkers, maybe with some real live people where you might have crashed and burned, and you found out exactly what it takes to get these people through it, how much effort it takes to get these people through it, and how much enjoyment they got out of you trying to get them through it. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's not worth it. But in fact, you also have to assess that the wild card and all that stuff, even after you've gone through the thought process, the test, the delivery part of it, where you make the decision about what's going to take it to get those people through, the assessment of it and the execution of it, there's fallout from it. So when you move from group to group, the wild card is the people themselves. Sometimes you deal with people who are dynamic. For example, I called for a group of the MIT students in the Northeast, which incidentally is my name spelled backwards. They are literally, I swear, the absolute most incredible people I've ever called for. So I went in there expecting that I was going to be able to call some pretty hard material. It was a challenge weekend. And these kids, I'll call them kids, they enter square dancing at challenge level. So they don't learn seesaw and they don't learn do paso because that's not on their list, I guess. They enter this level of challenge. So there's one of them trying to explain this to me. So while he's telling me all this stuff and he's saying, yeah, so we entered a challenge and we've been dancing for 6 weeks and we've gone through the C1, C2, C3A, C4, and we're just approaching the C9 list now. And I'll say, holy smokes. And inside, I'm just getting more and more bent up and I'm thinking, oh my God, maybe I don't have enough stuff that I'm going to be able to call. And I start getting nervous about it all of a sudden and thinking I'm going to be able to call just wickedly difficult to these people. And now keep in mind, I should tell you too that they weren't the only ones at the dance. So I'm listening to these guys talk about this. I'm like, oh, I got to call some really hard material. So I get on the microphone and the first words out of my mouth are, heads past the ocean, everybody scooting plenty, interrupt after the first box circulate with an in-roll circulate, interrupt after the second box circulate with a swing the fractions, but interrupt after 4/5 with a swing the fractions 4/5. And they went boom, 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 and they looked at me. And I was like, that was like the hardest thing I ever could have called in my life, and they were just looking at me going, next. And by halfway through the night, they were dancing mirror image at the back, if you know what mirror image is. A right and left through actually is a left and right through, and the left-hand person turns the right-hand person. No, the right-hand person turns the left-hand person instead. And they're at the back of the hall doing that. Now, while they're doing that, I'm watching them, calling as hard as I can to try to entertain them. And the fallout was that everybody else in the entire place, they were bleeding from the ears. It was so hard that it was absolutely impossible. And that's just an example of just some awful, awful judgment on my part. I fell into that trap where I was forced into a conscious decision-making process about the level that I was going to call, rather than going with the thought-out process, the tested process, knowing what I was going to need to get the majority of the people through, and discarding the whole concept of letting these dancers win with this material. Instead, I listened to this guy. I fell into the trap of doing exactly what they wanted, forsaking everybody else. And I've not been back to that group, incidentally. Anyways, yeah, so mutual decision. So I discarded the degree of difficulty, which is something else I like to talk about. We make decisions all the time about our choreographic choices surrounding degree of difficulty. How hard is some of this material? How hard is a lead to the left for a mainstream dancer? Maybe it's not difficult for an advanced dancer, but maybe it's impossible for a mainstream dancer. Maybe I know this group is as thick as a concrete wall, and they won't even, there is a group that I know that if you don't, when you say head square through, if you don't say now, they won't start. There's another group that you say, dance up to the middle and back, and without saying another word, they will pass through, wheel and deal, double pass through, first couple go left, second couple go right, dance up to the middle and back, and stop and look at you, see if you're with them or not. It's absolutely amazing that what goes out there. There's choreography that is meant to hurt. There are callers who write stuff that is meant to destroy a floor, and their delivery of that sometimes really does hurt the floor. They have choreography that's written, that's designed to have the dancers fail. I've seen people write choreography. They make a decision in their mind that I'm going to write so that these people can't dance to me. And usually that judgment, that choice, is predicated on some previous conversation I had with somebody who probably said to that caller, you don't call hard enough. Or some dancer came up and said something like, why don't you call something harder? This is kind of plain vanilla. So the response to that is you crush them. Because we all have that little piece of choreography that we know just crushes people. So what is the right choice? When someone comes up to you and says, how many times has this happened to you? When someone comes up to you and says, the club caller, you're a visiting caller someplace, and the club caller comes up and says, hey, don't worry about these people can do anything. Just call, they'll do anything. So how many times you got in the microphone and wish you could take back the first tip? And as you spend the rest of the night trying to get these people back on your side. They go sit down after the first tip, when you really want them to be building up to a great night. They're looking at the door, looking at their watch, getting ready to leave. That's just a bad judgment. If you listen, you really have to go with your own personal judgment in a lot of these cases, and how you should approach that type of a night. When someone comes to you and says, you should never ask what their ability is, in my opinion these days, because people have different opinions about. You really have to rely on your own ability to judge the floor, make a decision about how far you can take these people based on your past experiences, because you are the one that is driving the night, not the dancers. We're going to talk about singing calls in a little bit, so just theories of some singing calls. Now, on the personal side, the personality side of it, I am a fortunate young man in that I started calling when I was literally 9 years old. So I was a kid caller calling to adult groups, my parents' friends. So my parents ruled me with an iron thumb. I was not allowed to do anything. I was not allowed to step outside the boundaries that they set up for me. And then I literally grew up in square dancing. And the people that I'm calling to now are still the same people that I was calling to 30 years ago. And they have come to know me. And I have some widespread appeal. And I know what my strengths are. I have learned in 30 years that my strengths, in fact, is my personality, and the fact that I like to make people laugh, and they laugh at me, and I like that. So I have the benefit of being able to be funny because people have an expectation that I'm going to do some funny stuff. There are other callers, on the other hand, who just can't do that. John alluded to that. Their attempts at humor either fall on deaf ears or offend rather than achieve the goal that they're trying to get. And it's usually predicated on some previous information that they heard some other caller do something that was funny, and he thought he was going to get up there and do exactly the same thing, and it fails miserably. And sometimes the response to that then is their ego takes over, and you see them making even more bad decisions. It's like a whirlwind of bad decisions. And you end up with insulting people. All this stuff is very subjective too, and it's John talked about experience, or I'm sorry, you talked about experience, didn't you? And you have to make some bad choices, and I have made some just whopper bad choices in my life, and I learned pretty well. And from the other side, if you are a person with a temper, calling sometimes can really, square dance calling can really, if you can't check that temper, sometimes it can really get you, because we are driven as callers in the pursuit of success. We want the dancers to be successful at everything we do. And in the pursuit of that success, when people are failing at our attempts to try to get them, sometimes the response is anger. You get angry at people, and you say to them, turn around, for God's sakes, turn around. What, are you dumb? Turn around, But listen, for those of you who cannot hear, here's the gun to clear your ear. Like you hear people say that, if you don't like it, get out. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Just like, you hear that type of thing, and you think, God, why would that person ever let that get to that far? But it does, in fact, happen. I'll tell you one story about a caller who I love dearly. The guy had a really bad temper, and he had an English humor to go along with it that was really dry, and people either loved or hated him. There was nothing in between. They either loved him or they loved to hate him. One of the two. He was teaching a call. I can't remember what the call was. It's irrelevant. There was a square in front of him that had traveled to this dance, and they weren't getting it. They're trying, and they're waving at him, trying to get his attention, and he kept saying to them, would you like some orange juice? And so they were looking at him like, what do you mean orange juice? And he'd call a little bit more and trying to get these people through, and they wouldn't get it, and he'd go, now would you like some orange juice? And he's drawing attention to everybody. Now everybody's looking at this square, faltering and fumbling around. And he keeps on going about orange juice, orange juice. Well, finally, this square gets something. And he stops, he picks up the needle, he puts it on the side, and he goes, now, would you like some orange juice? Because that's what I have when I first wake up. And he laughed, but you could have heard a pin drop in that room. And I was at the back of the hall, and I broke out into a cold sweat, because I felt like, oh, thank God I'm not up there calling. It was just an awful experience, and he put the needle back on and started to dance because he realized that nobody thought that was funny, and that square kind of moved off the side of the floor and went to the back, and the treasurer was back there with his money out already, giving it back to the people, apologizing, and it was an awful, awful experience. But that was just an example of just bad judgment.
I want to jump in right here. Tim was commenting that he's made some errors. Every one of us have made mistakes, and I will tell you a story on mine and on myself because it's a little bit different. I know the circumstance that Tim was talking about, and that was a conscious, meaningful decision on that caller's part. But we also have those circumstances where we are so frustrated as callers in circumstances that we just lose it. Now, we all know we're not allowed to do that, right? It's in the handbook. Caller cannot, yell at the dancers, cannot lose it. But we're also human. Even though we're not allowed to be, it's in the contract. But nonetheless, it happens. And it happened to me in Hamilton.
Wait, I remember.
Yeah. And we had a particularly difficult hall to sound. It was always a nightmare. I mean, and the happy part of the story is that I get to keep going back to that festival repeatedly, so I didn't totally shoot myself in the head, but close. And we had been doing a workshop session. We were 40 minutes into the workshop, and the sound had been a problem the entire time, and I had finally gotten it tweaked to where everybody was seeming to be able to hear and respond. But I had been struggling every minute for every tip to get it just so. And I mean, we had changed speakers and we had adjusted this and tweaked that and dropped the music and asked the people not to talk too loud and anything you can think of. And a square comes in 40 minutes into the workshop. Everything's virtually been taught. We're about now to just kind of do a review and play with it. And they come in and they square up in the back left-hand corner. I got a square in the right-hand corner. They're doing okay. They can't hear. Well, they can't hear or else they missed the workshop, therefore they're not able to do what I've been teaching. But nonetheless, they've decided they can't hear. Now, I'm concentrating for all I'm worth because of the sound issue, and I'm peripherally getting some motion over here, but I don't know what it is, and I'm trying to keep everybody going and keep track of what's happening, and there's this, keeps getting this motion out of the corner of my eye, and I finally look back there, and there's this guy just doing this. He's just waving, and I lost it. I had just had more than I could deal with, and I said in the microphone during the music, I eased the music back, I said, "Sir, you can wave your arm until it falls out of the socket. That's as good as the sound's going to get. If you would like to bring your square down front, there's a space here. I will wait for you." There was no problem with the sound after that at all. Everybody could hear everything, because there was not a sound. They could hear me breathing, Needless to say, the square declined to come to the front. The next tip, actually, they did come to the front, and we went forward, and they were no more successful. There's a good probability. The reason for that wasn't purely they'd missed a lot of the workshop, but they were so unnerved that they would have lost it. Now, to tell you how I dealt with that, because I was wrong, clearly wrong, but I succumbed to my emotions. One of the couples approached me the next day from that square outside and said, we were really very embarrassed about that, and you shouldn't have been doing that. And I looked at them and I said, I am so glad you have come to me. This was a huge festival. I could never have found these people if I'd gone looking for them. I said, I'm really pleased that you came to me. Number one, you're absolutely right. I was completely wrong. I will tell you why it happened. It's not an excuse. No excuse. I was wrong. And number one, I apologize to you, and if you can find the other dancers of you, please tell them to come and see me, and I will personally apologize to them because I was wrong. I can't go find them. There's 300 squares here, but if I'm on the schedule. And they were so taken aback that I would have apologized for it. And then when I went back to that hall the next day, I went in and I apologized to the floor because I was wrong. But we are human too, and we can lose it, and we need to try not to do that. I think in 34 years I've lost it twice, and that was probably the first time. And so it's like, we got to be really, really careful. We have to guard against it. But yeah, it was a big mistake on my part.
It's truly about relationship management, how we manage these relationships. I'll tell you, one of the things that I do, for the most part successful, but occasionally it backfires, is when I'm calling, once I get comfortable with the people and they get comfortable with me, and if they have an expectation of what the night will go like, I try to get that. I arrive early, I control, and there's that word again, I control the people coming in through the door. I usually get close to the door and hear them, and if they come through the door saying, oh, you have to do that Italian thing you do, or you please do fisherman's luck, or do that Australian thing you do, or whatever that is, that says to me that these people have come to this dance knowing already who I am and what to expect. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to be calling in a place I've never called for in my life. I'll also stand close to the door to find out whether these people know me, and if they don't know me, I will choose to start the dance differently than I would in another place. And occasionally, and that almost always works, but occasionally it fails. I try to manage that part of the relationship between the floor and me and try to build on it as the night goes on, but sometimes I hit it wrong. Sometimes people come through the door and they'll say, oh, you have to do that Italian thing. We love that Italian thing you do, and we love all your dialects. Are you going to do those? And say, sure, and then you get up on the microphone and you take off calling like a crazy man, and people are dancing and they're looking at you like you're from another planet because you might be so dramatically different than what they are used to. They actually end up being shell-shocked. And so what you do is you backpedal. It happens with choreography too. When you fall into that trap, you backpedal as much as you can, trying to get these people back on your side until you get back into a place where you can make a decision about where you go. Sometimes it takes all night. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. But for the most part, it's successful because I already know what they kind of expect from me. Now, after 30 years of doing this, I have an idea, and I try to meet their expectations based on what I hear. If I don't hear anything, I usually kind of keep it low key. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about calling with other callers. John touched on it. Being a nice person says you should never go after another person. I have been in situations where I have called with callers who you get them in, I get them out type thing, and they got them into places that I didn't even know existed. And my response, had always been, over the microphone. I would never say anything over the microphone, but I usually take them out back to stage and pound their lights out. No, I'm kidding. This is being taped, isn't it? But I usually say something to them about that. I'll usually tell them it was a really awful thing to do to me, and they may think it's funny, but I certainly don't think it's funny, and the dancers generally don't think it's funny, especially if it happens more than once. Sometimes they think that's funny. If it happens more than once, immediately they realize that there's some competition up there on the microphone between the two callers, and it's been my experience that people don't like that. They don't like that at all. The other thing that you can do to control that situation is to talk to the other caller beforehand. And it's strange. I mean, we're just human beings, and I'm just a guy, but I get callers all the time coming up who I'm going to do the last tip with in the night, and they're nervous to call with me for some reason. I like to think I'm the most approachable person in the world, but maybe I'm not. And he's nervous like crazy. So we go through his box. We find music from his box. And I'll always tell him, what is your absolute favorite singing call? What is the singing call that you just like to do more than anything else? And even if I don't know it, I'll still do it or give it a shot with him. And if I really don't know it, like if it's a yodeling thing or something, and I just can't yodel. So we usually try to avoid those things. But I seek this other person's opinion. If I'm calling with a caller that I'm totally comfortable with, like John, I don't need to go to John beforehand because we have tons of experience working together, and we already know what our capabilities are, and I trust John enough to know that he's not going to pick something out of his box, for the most part, by the way, that I don't know. So that part, working with each other, is good. The other thing that you can do is, if you are comfortable with the other caller, sometimes you can actually set it up. You can have great little setups that John talked about. You get them in, I get them out. I do this thing where I have the caller turn around. I think I've actually done this with you. And I have them turn around and I say, callers, I'll go on this thing about callers are the greatest mental people alive. Most of us are incredibly mental. And I'll say, John, turn around, and John's going to follow, and I dance people around the floor. And dancers, while they're dancing, don't have a real good sense of where they are as they move around the floor, and I'm spending a lot of time telling them, asking John, saying, John, are you following this? Do you know where they are? And John will be on the microphone going, yeah, I got him. And occasionally he might say something like, slow down. And at some point, I'll drop the microphone and remind him, because sometimes he might forget, that I will leave them looking directly at their corner, so the get out is Alaman left. So, you can manage that all type of stuff, and then John doesn't turn around, and I say, get him out without looking, and he'll say Alaman left, and people think that's great. They know it's a setup, but it's fun, and both callers win in that situation. But the competition, you get them in, I get them out, and that type of stuff, that truly sets up a competitive nature, and the dancers, sometimes they like that, but if it fails, it just destroys. Massive failures, lack of judgment, big convention floor, and you decide that you are going to do progressive squares. Something like that is for one couple to walk out of the square, one couple to break a heel and has to sit down, and you have 70 squares of people in absolute melee. So before you enter into that situation, you might want to have a better consideration of the floor that you're dealing with. Really, that's about all, other than I wanted to say just working with round dance cuers. Sometimes working with round dance cuers, when I approach a night as if it's an entire show, and I try to find peaks, valleys, or I try to keep it on a certain plane all night long. Round dance cuers don't know that we're doing that. So it's good practice to strike up a conversation with a round dance cuer and say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of relax through the night, and in the middle of the night, I'm going to let it rip, and then I'm going to slow it down for the end of the night. And you'll be surprised that round dance cuers are pretty smart people. They actually will go right along with you. They'll pick their music differently than they would have if you didn't strike up that conversation. And it's that type of relationship management, those types of choices that you make to talk to each other, that really make the difference in the night. It truly does make a difference.
A couple things on that line with the cuers that I think is helpful. A cuer could really unglue you pretty quick, more than you might realize during an evening. If you've just brought the floor up and they turn around and drop them. Hang on one second, I have an incoming message. Okay. They just want to drop the floor. They can turn around and put on, a slow melodic waltz, and you're trying to build the floor, But I do some things, for example, I always unplug my record reset. I happen to use reset when I'm using vinyl. I always unplug that when my tip is over before the cuer comes up if they're sharing my equipment. They usually like having the volume control. They don't mind having it if they're still using vinyl. But that record reset can really destroy them. If they hit that button by mistake in the middle of the round, what have you done to them? Well, okay, they're professionals. They should have looked and checked it out. Well, they're human too. So you build in a little insurance. And I always say at the end of the tip when there are rounds, everybody claps on. I said, thank you, everybody. Let's please make some space for the round dancers. I do it religiously because the cuers really appreciate that. How many times you've seen a cuer have to come up and try to get the floor cleared just to be able to get the round dancers up? And you know what else? It also accelerates the rate of your program. It allows more things to happen. Some dancers who don't do rounds are kind of resentful sometimes of having rounds in the program. It's taking away from their dance time. Well, you've now kept the program moving even better. And I know some dancers are talking, don't necessarily hear what you said, but it's there, and you do it on a regular basis, and the cuers appreciate that. I did want to share with you also that Tim did not take me backstage and pound my lights out, but I did promise to never leave him in lines of four facing out again.
Okay. Just the last thing I want to touch on, too, is about judgment. We are all business people, by the way, and we have business decisions to make when it comes to our calling. Everything from buying records and where we buy them, if we are members of tape services, and if we choose to share those tape services with other callers and they don't have to pay, copying records illegally, those types of business decisions. The biggest one is contract obligations. I just want to touch on that very quickly, that there seems to be two schools of thought about the business part of our calling. A lot of people just minimize that and just essentially approach it on contracts on the utmost good faith and live up to those agreements. the other side of the coin, there is a school of callers that I've come across who approach this as a business, and their response is that any contract can be broken for any reason with 60 days notice or 50 days notice, or if something better comes along, they will in fact walk away from contracts. And you have to make a decision about how you are going to operate your business. And I can't help you with those types of decisions. There are some moral questions and moral obligations that you have to ask yourself. And if you are comfortable operating your business like you would buy a car, perhaps, then that is your choice. But you also have to live with those consequences. So let's do some fun stuff now. Music. John's going to take over music.
Oh, okay. A couple little things that are kind of fun. Remember I talked about before on choreographically saying, can I do this? And so on. Well, also when you pick your music has a lot to do with that, too. We make a lot of decisions, and some of them, as Tim was saying, are conscious and some of them are not. For example, you all made an outstanding conscious decision to attend this panel. Right, I mean that's really good exercise and good judgment, right?
Some of them are unconscious.
Right. Well, but of course, then there's the perception aspect. That's my view of it. You know, you may not feel the same way in another 25 minutes. But the idea here on music is, what do we do when we go in and we listen to a piece of music? We think about, can I use this piece of music? We also think about, how would I use this piece of music? I'm going to play just one or two examples of music. And the first one I'm going to play would be the one that's kind of interesting to ask you, do you think you would even call to this record or not? See if this baby will come up for us.
Oh, I'm sorry, turn that down. Talking about music, you know, you choose our singing calls and everything. Here's an example of a good decision. I grew up in a place called Stony Creek, Ontario, and the Italian population in Stony Creek is overwhelming. It's like there's like 10-to-1 Italian population, and they love to dance. So we had a bunch of them in our square dance, and they used to do this Italian thing where this came from, and they love that. Conversely, in Montreal, I used to go to Montreal all the time, and Montreal has a very, very, very large Jewish community that square dance. And I did this German dance a lot, and I really did not know that they would not appreciate that. And it took somebody to come up and say to me, you know, you probably shouldn't do that singing call here. So and after that I learned about all the decision-making process when it comes to music like that. So if you know your audience, and it enables you to choose your music a little bit better as well.
You know, it's really important on the local level, you know, as well, never to forget these principles and the idea of using this music or not using this music in a certain position. Singing calls. If a dancer comes up to you and says, you know, I really hated that singing call, you have to go through a conscious judgment as to whether you're actually going to use that particular record at that group again. It probably is not worth it, because, again, if that's going to upset or offend anybody, it's better to take it out of the case for that group, because nobody else is going to care, but your success is better if you pay attention to the same kind of principles that they're talking about, whether you're a traveling program or a local program.
Well, yeah, along that line, too, we always used to talk about this in caller schools, and we don't so much anymore, but I think we need to maybe get back to it, especially as we start using some of the alternative music. Pay attention to the lyrics of the singing calls that are coming out, and pay attention to where you are when you want to do those lyrics, or whether you don't want to use those lyrics. And there is a particularly beautiful piece of music out there that shall go nameless, but I tend to adjust the lyric. I'm not real comfortable, particularly in some areas of the country, saying when your body's lying flat out on the floor and you think I've loved you all I can, I'm going to love you a little bit more. It may be a great sentiment, but I'm not sure where I want to share that, So those kinds of things you need to think about.
Or the famous singing call that John actually recorded called Heartbeat in the Darkness, but the cue sheet said Heartmeat in the Darkness, which I thought was funny.
Fortunately, I only recorded. I had no control over the printing aspect. Yeah. This was a good record, though.
It was a good record.
Absolutely. I'm going to play something for you that I think is quite different, and I'll be interested to even hear the panelists' reaction to this. Makes it seem much more almost frantic, if you will, keeping up. And you have to work on how you phrase these pieces of music. It's very fun. The dancers have a great reaction to it, but it is very different. I've never heard anything like this. It's very different. Never. Keep it up at all. That transition is quite different. But it'll go back. So that type of stuff is fun, but is it for me? Is it for my group? Maybe your group of dancers would hate that. Those are conscious decisions, as Tim was talking about. And sometimes we let our own emotions override those conscious decisions. It's like, they may not like it, but I just love this piece of music. I've got to do it. Interestingly, quite often, if you feel that strongly about that piece of music, it will convey in your presentation, and you will actually sell it. They will actually end up liking it. Also, there's a lot of use of singing calls as patter records. And I'm stressing more patter than I am singers right now. I'll let Tim do the singer call aspects, because I think use of patter music is heavily under-addressed as a topic. But think about it. We spend a lot more time in our patter than we do in our singing calls as far as the amount of dance time that takes place. So I spend a lot of time in evaluating what I want to pick. And there's been a big tendency in the last several years to callers using singing calls as patter records. Some really like it, especially if there's a strong phrase there and there's a good melody line they can tend to follow without getting caught up in singing it. It keeps them on the phrase, so they like that. But not all of it is as easy to call to as you might think. I'm going to show just 2 examples, and then I will be done. You can put a fork in me, because I'll be done. Can I have some rotation there? Oh, that's about right. It is from a CD. The name of the tune is Fuego. And F-E-U-E-G-O. That is not how it comes out on the CD. It takes someone with a great deal of talent and commitment to go through and edit that type of thing. We bought the CD, we put it into the computer, and my wife Mary, using Cool Edit, edited that and put in the loops for me, the tracks. She's much better at it than I am by far, and quite often in many of our pieces of music, I can't ever hear it loop. I don't know where it happens. It's very neat, and I'm very fortunate to have that. And we can get you the name of the CD. See Mary, she can probably help you. Okay. This is a singing call. Great pattern. Makes a great pattern record. And I would suggest you not call anything of choreographic depth when using this. Just let the dancers play. Let them jump into the music. We'll do all kinds of things like this. You can put in sound effects. You can do anything, because they're into that samba. They're just going, man. Great record in that fashion, and a little bit different choice. That is Iko Iko on Sounds 2000. That's S2K2007. Larry Shipman appeared to be the recorder there. Okay, thank you, sir. And give me 1 second.
No, it's okay. There was a licensing issue at one point. Yeah, probably.
Alrighty.
Beg for forgiveness, not for permission.
Okay. All right. How many know the song? Love is in this at every program. You know, we wanted it mainstream plus dance, C1, doesn't matter. Right? They like it all. Right? It's called Love is in the Air. It's on Tennyshue, TENNYSHOE Records. It's called by Fred Jones and TSR 2006-00. If you listen, it'll continue to build, and I've worked with the idea on this, building my resolution to where the music comes up. But that steady beat is there. You get them moving. Not that for your right mouth grave, your Alabama left. This sends chills to the dancers. It's nothing tricky. Make sure everything flows. Just one piece into the next. I time this so closely that they even lean the wrong way, they're toast. If they have to think about the definition, they can't do it. But it'll dance just that way. It's magnificent. You know? And very different approach. Remember what I said earlier in the seminar, though? Is it for you? Can you use it effectively that way? Maybe you have to experiment. Maybe you don't. Yeah, Mary's comment too from the side is it appropriate for the floor? Will your floor dance that way? So that kind of thing, or can you get them to dance that way? So those are some thoughts on some pattern, a little bit different stuff.
All right, we're going to move on to some Q&A point because we have about 10 minutes left, and we made some alluding to singing calls, but I think in favor of with conversation with Tim here briefly, in favor of getting your chance to ask this panel questions, we're going to move to that. But one point I want to make briefly is that you've noticed that this has not been a choreography session, and that was in fact by design. I don't know how many people thought they were walking into a choreography session. But the fact of the matter is, you use judgment in every aspect of what you do as a caller, and it's really important to pay attention to that. And so judgment isn't choreography, it's just how you, it's not just choreography alone, but it really is how you apply your thought process to the entire activity. Do we have some questions? And I've got this particular microphone, so I'll come back and bring the microphone to you and just direct it to which of us that you would like to. Who? Okay, we'll take the comment first. Please name and rank and serial number, please.
Keith Ferguson, Saratoga, California, and I try to leave Larry in the most awkward positions I can every time I call with him. that wasn't the comment, no.
I did notice.
A couple of things I just wanted to comment as a local club caller, where I think it fits under the category of judgment. And one of the things I think is very helpful is to set some goals for what you're trying to do with a club, and then let the club know what they are. I'll publish them every year or two. And, for example, one of my goals, which would not be appropriate for every club, but is to keep the level of the dancing level of the club consistent with that they will see at local hoedowns and regional festivals. Other goals may change from year to year, like try to add more variety to my calling without adding complexity. But let the club know. When I first started with this club, they were a very small club that was on their way out. The previous caller told me it'd be a good experience for a few months until they died off. And the goal was quite different. There was how to get the level, how to improve the level to a certain point. But we could never have done it. The board and I talked over at many board meetings. We spent many half-hour sessions talking about what would be the right goal. And that way you can get away with things in terms of judgment that you wouldn't be able to if you hadn't reached agreement with the club members that this is what you're trying to do. The other area is that I think in how you approach dealing with club. I do go to all the board meetings of our club, and how you approach this with the members to try to let them know that their ideas are valuable. Recently, at a dance, at a hoedown, their big dance, they decided they were going to have a split the pot and a raffle, and then somebody wanted to have a silent auction. And I'm thinking, there isn't time for any dancing at that with all those things going on. But I knew the people that wanted to do these all were great people that were really enthusiastic. And so my approach was to say, well, I'm emceeing the dance, and I know people don't like a lot of announcements, so can you at least keep everything that happens down to a few times so I don't have to go up on the stage more than twice during the evening to announce this? And they agreed with that. And after seeing how it worked for 1 year, the next year, they decided that this was too much and they shouldn't do this. And so they don't do it anymore. So it worked.
Okay, great. Do we have a question here?
Ron Marcus from Tucson, Arizona. Have you ever been in the situation where, such as I found myself in a little over a year ago, where you're calling a dance, you're thinking everything is going great, but it's not, until nearly at the very end, when someone comes up to you and says, or two or three couples actually, not just one couple, but two or three couples came up and said, you better get off that experimental stuff, Marcus. You're going to lose the whole crowd if you don't. And this is about a half an hour before the dance ended. And it was a night when I was walking Dodge, the girls walking the boys Dodge. I can't think of some of the other things that were there. A 3-in-1 line, and I call cycle and wheel. I didn't call it cycle and wheel. I just those who can recycle, those who can wheel and deal, sweep a quarter. Things that weren't really all that exotic, but it just seemed like it was on one of those phase of the moon type nights where that kind of thing is not something that they were happy dancing that night. Only an hour and a half of the dance went by before anybody said anything. 7-8 squares on the floor all seemed to be having a good time, clapping and applauding and whatnot at the end of each tip. But then half an hour before the dance came up, or before the dance is over, these three couples approached me with this. And like I said, it wasn't one couple, it was three. Thought everything was going okay, judgment, thinking everything is going fine, but it wasn't. What do you do?
I think at that point, it's already too late. It's a difficult spot. I don't get that. I don't get people coming up and telling me that I stink. You know, they tend not to tell you, so you generally never know. You benefit actually kind of from hearing somebody say that, because now you can look back on the night and you can reflect, because hindsight's always 20/20, but you don't always know how that's going to work. I don't think there's anything you could do at that point. A lot of times you'll find the absolute reverse happens. Some nights I go home from a dance beating my head against the steering wheel, trying to figure out whatever possessed me to do what I did that night. And a couple of weeks will go by, and you'll run into some people at the dance, and they'll come up and tell you that was the best dance we've ever been to in their whole entire lives. And you think they got to be lying. You really think they got to be lying, just trying to be nice. But then you hear it again and again and again. And by then, you also lose the benefit of being able to reflect immediately upon those 2.5 hours that you called to try to remember what the heck it was that you did, because you remember how bad it was in your mind. And so you try to erase that stuff and never do that again. So it's a tough spot to be in. I've been in it. It happens to me, I like to tell you, weekly, but it seems like it happens a lot.
If you're fortunate enough to be calling dances where your partner's with you, you may make use of your greatest asset, because your partner is, Kathy in particular in this case, she's talking with people all night long, and she's letting me know what's happening out there. So dancers that might not come and talk to me, whether it be about the sound or the level of the choreography or anything else that's going on that I miss for whatever reason, if you really partner, if you work this as a partner, that's one way that you can overcome these. If you're on the road and you don't have somebody with you that can do that for you, then you have to find another suggestion. But for those that can think of this as a team sport, it really is. Other questions?
Not really a question, a comment. I'm Al Shaw from Boise, Idaho. I'm with CALLERLAB. Talking about a cure killing your dance. I know that happens more often than we like to believe. And there's no excuse for it as cures. If I'm working with a caller that I have known, I kind of know what their feeling is, what their progression is usually. But if my caller changes, like he did the last dance that I called before I came down here, he had a different plan that night, but he didn't tell me. I kind of line my songs up ahead of time, and he does a really upbeat on. Normally he does his first two making things grow, and then he'll drop it a little bit. That night he decided not to do that. He only made the first one grow, and he wanted to drop it from there and then come back up a little bit later in the evening. Well, I had my songs planned, and I almost dropped the whole dance for him because he hadn't told me that ahead of time. So, as callers, get with your cure and let him know what your plan is, and then work it out. And I know we don't always do what we're supposed to do. Let us know about it, too.
Thank you, Al. Ron, I wanted to make a comment. We have a question over here, too, Larry.
Okay,
Ron,
we got time for your comment, one more, and then we'll close.
Okay. Your situation, too, lots of thoughts were running through my head. I won't say I've never been in that situation. And we all have, and we scramble, what can I do to kind of pull this together? But also, be fair to yourself, too. Now, you got through telling us that they were clapping their hands, they were smiling, they were having a good time. Are we getting a vocal minority here? Where those three couples in the last tip together came to my mind, and their square didn't do well. And they were standing around complaining about it, say, well, I can't do that stuff. Well, let's just go tell him. I don't know either. But I'm processing in my mind that seems unique. to me to have gone the entire evening and then suddenly, especially when you are aware of how the floor is responding and reacting. So maybe you don't need to fall on your sword quite so quickly, or your microphone, as the case may be. But give that some thought too. I mean, it's certainly correct to evaluate and take in what they're telling you and try not to be too defensive and snap back. I've seen callers do that, and that's not helpful to you or to them. You want to imagine, it's like, I generally, if I'm confronted like that, it's very disarming to people to agree with them, It's like, I really appreciate you telling me, thank you. I mean, every group has a little bit different attitude, a different culture in their club, and I don't know you guys that well, and I'll see what I can do about that. Thanks a lot. Well, they go away feeling really good because, you thanked them for what they thought was a really nasty message, but they felt strongly enough to give it to you, even if they were wrong. And that's part of what Tim was talking about management of confrontation, management of just dealing with people, your interactions.
All right, one more. Yeah, Bob asked from Rockton, Illinois. Had a situation about 6 months ago calling a dance, and basically what I usually try to do is I get to a dance way before pre-rounds so I can watch the round dance cuers and the round dancers for the good round dancers. And I try to be set up so I don't bother the round dance cuer. And so we're getting down to my last tip, and I'm doing the last tip. And here's this round dance cuer tearing down his equipment while I'm doing the last tip. Now, I don't know how you guys feel. I'd like to find out. But one of my feeling is, I try to get there early enough to where I don't bother him in pre-rounds. My dance is not over with. And maybe gesture says, but I don't want to be a real big smart ass and tell that person because it might get in trouble. I might get in trouble and that stuff. My wife kind of likes to corral me a little bit. But what's your feelings on that situation?
First off, you are a smart ass. Yeah. You know what? There is no accounting for personalities, and sometimes just stuff happens, and I would tell the round dance. I'd go after the round dance cure and take her out back the stage and explain to her that that was still, the dance was still going on. And I also have the same discussion with festivals. You go call a festival during the last tip. All the callers are calling together sometimes, and you see the committee working around the room, putting the chairs away and taking all the decorations down. I hate that. I hate when you start a tip and you got a square dance hall and it ends up as a gymnasium. I really hate that. So I usually tell them afterwards. I usually take them aside and go, I'm glad I could come and call for you and all. I had a great time, but it's really kind of awful that you do that. It kind of takes away from everything. So I always tell them that's how I handle it generally.
Yeah, remember also on that situation when they are you find yourself in that circumstance, it is in the rule book. You can't shoot them. You can't do that. I'll show you.
Please write that down.
Right,
I don't want you to forget that note.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's in the CALLERLAB book. I'm sorry, Al. But realistically, it is distracting. But we're guilty as callers too. How many times have you stepped from the stage and a dancer comes up to share and talk with you, and you guys get caught? We all get caught right up in that, and we're right at the cuer's feet or just off to one side and distracting them, and that's really rude. And we need to be aware of that too. And but Tim's right. You make them aware because maybe there's probably an innocent thing. They just weren't thinking. So make them aware of it. But we also try to remember to step away.
So just a last thought, how do you measure how well your judgment is working? Are you using good judgment? Here are 5 points I wrote down that you might think about. Dancers succeed. Dancers laugh and smile. Dancers keep coming back. They tell their friends. More dancers come in to dance. So that may be one way you can judge that. Thank you all for being here, and I'd like to have you give a nice round of applause for John and Tim, our panelists. If you like having this type of a session at the convention, say so on your critique sheets. Thank you.
Thank you to you too, Larry, for moderating and stepping in. Thank you.